Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just wrapped up talking about some of these initial storylines that are surrounding the Super Bowl 58 matchup between the 49ers and the Chiefs. And I withheld a little bit on talking about the Chiefs for a lot of this because now in this segment we are going to be getting into the specifics of how would a Super Bowl win affect the Chiefs and the Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid duo going forward as far as legacy-wise. So, obviously, Patrick Mahomes, brief little history lesson here. 6 seasons as a starter. He has appeared in 6 consecutive AFC Championship games and now is reaching his 4th Super Bowl. Obviously, in those championship games, he is 4-2, lost to Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time, in his first appearance, and then lost to Joe Burrow a couple years ago on the Bengals run. So, now looking to win his 3rd ring. I think that this Super Bowl would far and away be the most significant up to this point. Obviously, the first championship is, in a lot of cases, the most important because you can't have a second or third without the first. But for a talent such as Patrick Mahomes, and talking about a guy that, despite being as young as he is, already being considered for the greatest of all time conversations, I think that this is the one that could really set him apart. I think that in a lot of people's eyes, especially around my age, a lot of Chiefs fans, obviously, people are already sort of clamoring to make him the greatest quarterback of all time. But I think that this one just means that much extra because of the fact that it would be a repeated championship. And I have sort of had this rule myself and it shouldn't be that surprising as I am a Patriots fan, but I have personally had a rule where at the beginning of every season when I am picking who I think is going to win the Super Bowl just on a long shot, it's never the team that just won the year prior. Because that doesn't happen. As long as I've been alive, born in 2001, it has happened 2 times in my lifetime. Both times were the New England Patriots, where the greatest coach of all time and the greatest quarterback of all time were paired together, and they were paired together and they were able to overcome the odds. That's not a normal thing. The way that the NFL is typically run is there's tons of roster turnover in between seasons because of the cap situation, the hard cap. I know that in years past and recently at least, there's been a lot of people saying, oh, well, the salary cap doesn't exist, which, while there are definitely loopholes, that's still not totally true. And we saw the Chiefs have to make the massive sacrifice of trading their number 1 receiver, maybe the best receiver in the league, in Tyreek Hill, to a conference rival because of the fact that they had to pay their other guys. They had to pay Patrick Mahomes the contract that he did. Travis Kelce was already on a very large contract. And you can't be paying just 3 players alone 50% of your salary cap, because how are you going to operate as a franchise going forward? They knew that was the case, so they did sort of the unthinkable at the time, which was trading Tyreek Hill. Usually, for the majority of teams, that would sort of disrupt the cohesion of the group, losing your number 1 threat, and takes a little bit to retool in some ways. But for the Chiefs, they have Patrick Mahomes, who is obviously this generational talent, and still had Kelce too, of course, and Kelce was absolutely massive for them in that Super Bowl run last season. And this year, even while he was sort of banged up and dealing with injuries, and he doesn't quite look the same athletically, he is still producing big time for them. Had a massive game against the Ravens, 11 catches on 11 targets, 116 yards, and a touchdown. So I think that when you look at the possibility of the Chiefs repeating here, and you go back in history, there are only 8 teams that have ever repeated in Super Bowl history. It was the Packers doing so in the first 2 Super Bowls. There were a couple instances from 1970 to 1980 of them, of a couple different franchises. You get the deal. A lot of these teams were in the past, and it's not the same NFL where there are more teams that are looking to sign your players, can, sort of try and steal off your best players and such. And, you saw it with the Eagles last year. They were still a good roster this season. I know that things really fell apart for them towards the end, but you lose your top 2 tacklers on defense. You lose your best defensive lineman in Javon Hargrave. You lose your leading rusher from last season in Miles Sanders. It's just all of this turnover can be so hard to manage, and yet somehow the Chiefs keep doing it year after year. So top to bottom, everybody there deserves credit. Where does Patrick Mahomes rank in all-time quarterbacks if he wins a Super Bowl this season? That would be his 3rd. If he wins in these coming Sundays, that pushes him solely to 3rd all-time in quarterback playoff wins. He just tied a handful of other names this year. Peyton Manning, Steve Young, John Elway, Terry Bradshaw. He just tied them all at 14 in significantly less games already at a significantly younger age. Now moving forward, he has the potential to pass Peyton Manning in both wins and rings, and I think that it's kind of hard to put these other guys. Obviously, they have some of the longevity to support them as far as, full resumes. Patrick Mahomes hasn't had necessarily the years to be awarded as many MVP awards, such as a Peyton Manning or something like that, but I do think that you probably push Mahomes into that tier with Tom Brady and Joe Montana. And I think that he's probably already on the Mount Rushmore, if that's not crazy to say. And that would put him into, I think, solidified top 3 all time. And then I think that what puts, obviously, Brady and Montana above Mahomes at this point is a little bit longevity based, but that's because regular season and all-time stats, that's one thing, but it is continuously winning. Now, if you look at specifically the Brady and Mahomes argument, Brady was sort of picked up by his defense in those early years. He wasn't necessarily the full driving force for the Patriots in those early games. Even 2018, when he won his final Super Bowl with the Patriots, yes, he went on to win with the Buccaneers as well, but specifically in 2018 with the Patriots, they only scored 13 points in the Super Bowl. But he made the big play, the throw down the field and the seam to Gronk, that sort of ignited that one touchdown. And yes, obviously having the greatest coach of all time and Bill Belichick helps, because he shut down Sean McVay's revolutionary offense that year. But that also sort of takes me into the conversation here of Andy Reid, where it's just not possible for one person single-handedly to win a Super Bowl. So their front office deserves credit. Andy Reid deserves loads of credit as well, based off of this would put him in an elite group as far as, I think it's currently 4 head coaches in NFL history it is 4 coaches in NFL history have 3 or more Super Bowl wins. Andy Reid is now looking for his third as a head coach. That would put him in 1 of 5, and very rarefied air for someone that maybe had a little bit of bumps and bruises. The Philadelphia tenure didn't go quite as well as maybe hoped. Still some success there, but he was, if you remember, towards the end of that stretch, very much, in my opinion, scapegoated for the lack of success for a franchise that they now since have a Super Bowl, but hadn't really accomplished much at all in the history of their organization. And Andy Reid comes in. He has some early success with Alex Smith, but then sort of helps bridge that gap between Alex Smith, a very good all-time quarterback, not Hall of Fame level, but one of the most solidified starters without being exceptional, I think, almost, in Alex Smith, who was very good at times, but he was just never able to fully elevate his team in that level. Had a lack of postseason success, one of the worst winning percentages. I know wins aren't fully a quarterback stat, but one of the worst winning percentages in the postseason history for a quarterback, into Patrick Mahomes, who is this all-time talent. And I think that the two of them in Mahomes and Reid merging together, it was just such a perfect fit. Reid, who what sort of went under the radar as one of these other revolutionary offensive-minded guys, and then finally having his muse almost in this talent of Mahomes to be able to fully play out what he was wanting the team to look like. And it just allows them to move around a lot of pieces, obviously, such as trading a Tyreek Hill and still being able to have success. What does Mahomes have to do to surpass the Montana and the Brady? I don't think there's anything he can do this season. He can get himself on that tier. And to be on that tier alone is a ridiculous thought, because when Tom Brady retired with 7 Super Bowls, I obviously grew up in this Brady era. I never got to watch a Montana, but I'm sure there was a time when Montana was 6-0 in Super Bowls, and it's like nobody can ever touch this guy. Jerry Rice had the record at the time, obviously playing with Montana and a little bit Steve Young as well, but having this thought to be unbreakable record of most postseason receptions in NFL history. We just saw that get broken by a Patrick Mahomes-led offense to his number one weapon in Travis Kelce. When Brady finishes with that 7th, immediately the thought is there's no way anybody can ever touch this guy. And yet here we are looking at a 28, I believe, year-old Patrick Mahomes, who's looking to be 3-1 in Super Bowls, have the 3rd most quarterback playoff wins in NFL history just 6 years into starting. It is almost unbelievable. And I think that the repeat would put him in such rarefied air that nobody at this point, it's not even a debate. We saw Lamar Jackson call Patrick Mahomes a Hall of Famer already heading into this past weekend, and nobody really batted an eye, because it's true, if Patrick Mahomes doesn't take another snap in his career, he's already probably a first ballot Hall of Famer. And from here on the end of Patrick Mahomes' career, it's trying to sustain that for as long as possible. And for him, really, it's about championships. And that's what this year is about. It's what every year coming forward will be about. Sure, the MVPs would be nice and some of these passing stats, but ultimately, obviously, we see the league expanding to 17 game seasons, passing more often throughout the season, the increase of the passing game over the years, the sort of loss of the true dominant running backs. So the stat books can get a little bit messy. One thing that can never be taken away from you is being a champion. That's what Patrick Mahomes has been to start his career, and we're going to see how long he can sustain this highest level of success going forward. So we're obviously going to be doing a lot more on the Chiefs, the 49ers, and this Super Bowl matchup going forward. But before we do all that, I think that it's time to just take one last look on the Lions and the Ravens. Had a little bit of technical issues talking about the Ravens yesterday. Just want to close the book on these two franchises that suffered very emotional losses over the weekend and just sort of wrap up the talks on them until we get into further off-season conversations later this season. But now we are going to be taking a quick break. We will be back after that with Lions and Ravens talk, so stick with us.